In this world, you're either a lover or a hater. So Lev and I have actually switched roles and gotten out of our comfort zone. So I'm going to be playing the optimist here, and Lev is going to play the pessimist. So first of all, when we start thinking about networks, what are we really talking about? I mean, this is kind of everywhere. So the way we defined it really is technical infrastructure that supports the collection, sharing, transformation, and transport of data that allows people, machines, businesses, cities, and other networks to connect and interact, along with the societal and cultural activities and expectations that are enabled by that infrastructure. And then looking at it from the other side, which is the human side, it's the social network and interactions that emerge because of or in spite of these technological enhancements. So a couple of thoughts just to, for you to hold with you as we go into this. From our favorite, Marshall McLuhan, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. And then as we think about networks, really, Aristotle, he loved our networks, right? The totality is not, as it were, a mere heap, but the whole is something besides the parts. So hold those in mind as we talk about this. And we're really going to look at it from the very, very, very small from concept of networks to the very, very big concept of networks and the implications of that. So to take a second on this, I'm going to share with you kind of the optimist vision of this future. So first off, network bandwidth will be like oxygen. It's going to be necessary for the daily functioning of individuals in society, and it's going to be a key economic indicator. Without it, the workings of daily life will grind to a halt. So does that sound optimistic? Yeah, okay. Well, that's where anyone feel like that's optimistic?
Sure.
Good, okay. So think about it like this. Networks of devices will communicate across multiple network types. Okay, these types will be big broadband, they might be cloud networks, and then they could be small and spontaneous network nodes that are driven by lightweight and energy efficient devices and protocols, and they can be anywhere and everywhere. In fact, everyone will have a personal network. Okay, and that personal network will connect with the individual's external devices, as well as their internal devices. So the personal network is, connected to my approved extended network, such as healthcare providers. So all of those little sensors and nodes that might be inside me will be connecting to my personal network, which will connect to the larger network. And it will give a new concept to the idea of the human binome. So sensors, which are a key part of this new network, right, will be embedded in the clothes that we wear. They might actually be robots that would enable sort of a more natural human interface. Through their connection to the networks, these sensors then enable sensory data to be shared remotely. So we don't have to be in the same space together. And 3D projection will be tied to that, and as that improves, and it is greatly improving every day, we'll be able to interact with that individual. We'll be able to also through other senses be able to smell flowers in the Alps while we're in our office in San Francisco. Or if you put it into the nature of business, I'll be able to oversee the quality control on that production line in Timbuktu and be anywhere in the world. And so what's the good of that? Well, think about, the CO2 emissions, and, 48% of the travel in 2001, that's not even today, was spent on business. So what can we do for the world by being interconnected in these different networks? So of course that raises technology, issues. The networks have to be registered and connected. We can't rely on one single network. And so thinking about drones or microsatellites in all different visions, which will then connect and create various network nodes so that it is, in a sense, self-healing. When something happens in one place, it can operate another, and another part of the network can step in to cover for that. Therefore, making sure that all aspects, all areas of the globe have some sort of connectivity. So the issues we have now, where we can't get that wired, backbone into the small villages in Africa or the mountains of Nepal, or et cetera, we're not going to have that problem anymore. So all of a sudden, the first world and the third world and our ability to access this is no longer a problem. Do you want to say anything about that, Lev?
I'm going to say, and you really believe that? But we won't turn this too much into debate. I want to just sort of say by level set that today there are 10 billion devices on her network, worldwide. And in the next 5 years, conservatively, that number is going to grow to 50 billion. And if you extrapolated another decade, only 5% of all the things that will be on the network in the next 15 years are currently on the network today. And that's before we get to a place, a black swan she didn't go to, which is embedded network devices. You've got us as close as our clothing, but I think there are implants and all kinds of other things coming that portend for hundreds of billions of devices that need to be networked. And so the question that I want to pose in the dystopian view of that reality is actually one of essentially going back 2 slides to the McLuhan quote, which I invite you to take a look at. One more, if you don't mind.
More, sorry.
Yep. And ask you to be thinking about this quote, and then if you don't mind going forward to my question for you guys. What do these 5 people have in common? And can you name more than one? Sorry? You got Doug in the bottom right. You got Norman Wiener right in the middle. Margaret Mead, yeah. Van Neumann, for those of you who don't know, the Austrian in the bottom left, and Karl Deutsch, who's a Harvard political economist. They all actually belong to a club of cybernetics. They were the founders of the world of cybernetics. All of the intellectual precursors to all of this amazing world of network-connected devices. And yet, they designed it way before there was protocols. What do they all have in common? They were all products of the devastation of the Second World War. Humans gone amok in terms of ideology, in terms of completely unfettered logic. In some ways, the triumph of militarization, because there was no way to stop it. And 4 of the 5 were actually directly products of that. That is to say, they were actually in Europe during the Second World War. And they were all committed to, all cybernetics club members were and are to this day, and I want to suggest that this is the McLuhan essence, believed in the value proposition that if we built networks to 5 billion, to 50 billion, to maybe to 80 billion devices, maybe even 100 billion devices, the more we were networked to each other, the more we would find out what we had in common, and thereby avoid or at least reduce the risk of ever going to the catastrophe of a Second World War, of the devastation to the human condition and to the broader environment around us. And I think that that's a really kind of part of the underlying intellectual, sort of the triumphalism of the network. All these wonderful things are going to happen because it's a product of how we designed the network. It was informed by trying to reduce chaos and risk. But if you go to the next club, just briefly, these are three folks you're not likely to know. And so if you haven't read Jacques Ellul, the French theologian, who wrote a book called The Technological Society in 1954, or just above, if you haven't read the American historian Lewis Mumford, who actually wrote a book 20 years before that, in 1934, called The Technological Civilization, or Ivan Ilyich, who's probably a bit more well-known. This is part of a completely different club that didn't actually win the day in terms of intellectual thought. And yet they are the essence of what I would take to be the need to realize, it's kind of the tradition that leads us to McLuhan, which is that we have created a logic, a technological logic, which now actually we have no control over. And it creates, rather than all of the wonderful assumptions of my colleague here, my distinguished colleague here, talks about in terms of the opportunity, actually creates in many ways the antithesis of the outcomes. Because these folks, this club that was shuttered out because they raised from the beginning the rather significant challenge of actually being run by machines, raised the following kind of conditions. Rather than the network being generative in all the ways that Mara outlined, actually what's happening is just the opposite. Hyperlocalism and chambers of conversation are all very, very real. They're echo chambers, they're hyperlocalisms, there's xenophobia all over the place. And you don't have to go far. Events last week in Paris are exemplary of that activity, but so too are developments in this country when it comes to rhetoric and to politics. We also have the reality that rather than being generative, many of the privacy concerns we have drive us to dark nets. Not to open network experiences, but rather to the parts of the network that actually can't be traced. Again, significant issues that are out there. Rather than it being for the wonderful human condition of putting connectivity into Nepal, actually it's the marauders, who are the captains of industry, who have stolen our internet. And turned it into nothing but crass entertainment of little or no value, in fact maybe negative value and consequence. So it seems to me that notwithstanding the fact that we designed the network in many ways for all of these wonderful goodness that you outlined, I think in reality the fact that we've created a network which is about the triumph of rationalism and scientific method and the notion of progress, in reality there's a great tradition of 75 years of thinking about this, which really says there's a deep, dark underside to this, and that we should be thinking about that and thinking about how to respond to it as we go forward.
I agree. I agree.
You don't, not today.
There's always an underside to just about everything that we do. And one of the, benefits of the network is that we have the ability to expose and highlight some of the things. Think about Syria. Think about the things that happen in Iraq or Iran or in other places in the world where people have been shut down and they have found ways to connect. And it's always through that edge device. In Beijing, 25 years ago, it was the fax machine that saved them. Again, a connected device. And today it's our cell phones, and it's the unexpected social networks that can pop up. I think also you talked a little bit about the dark forces, and I think we have an opportunity here through the networks to share, to have more machine learning around who we are as our personal profile and identifiers. So think about it a little bit like like this, that in fact our digital footprints can create a unique identifier for us, such that, and combine that with some of the various sort of biometrics, and that between your digital footprint and your biometrics, it would make it almost impossible for somebody to be able to replicate that, because it's continually evolving. No longer do we have to go to LastPass and enter in some new password that we have to remember that has some association with our firstborn child. Now it will really be about our behaviors and our actions that will capture that. And in fact, there will be security bots on the network that will continually sort of be distributed across, have the ability to identify, quarantine, or destroy sort of malicious acts before they even happen to us.
So again, just kind of reflecting on that, which is again nothing but utopian, fanciful kind of thinking, is that if you go back again to the assumptions of the great tradition from which you speak, which is not this group of critics, but rather that group of folks from the world of cybernetics, all of us, or all of them, I'm no longer part of us, I guess, none of them really actually expected that the state, that the actual government, the actual state apparatus would actually be able to remain the center, the locus of power. Because the network was, after all, designed to be distributed and ultimately in the form of TCP/IP, designed to actually withstand a nuclear fallout. So much that we wouldn't need to have government at all. And all of the examples that you cited, Syria, Iran, Iraq, China, in the United States, the government is actually revolting against the network. And we dismiss the power of the state at our own peril when it comes to the future impact. The NSA experience this past year is really, if we think we expose the iceberg, we expose the tip of the iceberg. Iran has shown that it's prepared to shut off the internet. Syria has shut off the internet. We have ways of shaping the internet. The Chinese obviously are highly, highly selective in the way that they allow access to the network. All of that really has been discounted for 75 years. It's just a matter of time until the network makes it irrelevant to have a government in terms of authority and power. And the government is pushing back, the state is pushing back. And actually, when you take a look at the people who are writing the rules of the internet going forward, it's moved from a bunch of very forward-looking cyberneticists and people who created TCP/IP and the network schemes, and now the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, and all of the governments are actually, there are bedfellows that would make you cringe in terms of people who are basically, governments who are basically saying, we are going to take over the internet. And if anybody has fanciful ideas about what the future means in terms of the network when government is in control, right? Again, I think the next 25 years could be actually a very, very scary part of reality, and I don't just think it's them. I think it's actually going to impact us as well. I think our own government, perhaps not the ones that are grabbing the headlines in our favorite Huffington Post or New York Times, but actually the folks who are running the show here have designs on exactly how they're going to control the game.
Maybe a new constitutional amendment, the right to bear something, right to bear, yeah. So, Lev, you were so pessimistic. You do a really good job of that.
And amazing that for a woman who is almost always somewhat dark about the internet, you managed to pull it off pretty well.
Well, I want you guys to leave with an optimistic thought in your mind. So, thinking about something that can sort of transform the fate of the planet. So we talked about scale. The planet is a huge piece of this, and so one of the benefits of thinking about where the network is going and the billions and billions of devices that will be on the network is that we have to think about energy and how to make it sustainable. And so it's pushing out some of our various other technology innovations around electricity and electrical grids, so that we'll really be able to run these devices without taxing the earth in the ways that we're taxing it today through better battery, better and smaller batteries, but also there's research now going on around the actual generation of energy for these low energy devices through just movement. And things like that. So, and being able to pick up the energy of some of the movement around these devices, so they don't actually have their own power source. But this then leads to this other sort of transformation, and sort of thinking about some of the industries that have been kind of hot in the news, disruption industries. We'll think about the networks of self-driving cars, and what that will mean for us in terms of mass transit. And in fact, you could draw on an algorithm that would take into account location and your personalized travel needs, so that every car on the road would have full occupancy. In fact, car ownership would be unnecessary, which would mean that we could get rid of all of those god-awful parking lots that Joni Mitchell used to sing about. And we'll think about going from, car utilization from a 20%. I mean, think about all those cars sitting there for at least 80% of the day waiting for their owner to come back to full utilization. And so I want to leave this conversation with you guys really thinking about the network as this kind of key enabler, and then it's an enabler for us to create the world that we want to be in. And I think that's really what the task is ahead of us. There's always the ability for us to go to the dark side. And it's really up to all of us in this room to provide the world that our children, our grandchildren will want to live in.
And if I could just sort of add also with a final closing thought here, I like the idea of reading old things, and from 1930 to forward. A piece that just came out last week, it's 1 page long and it lives only on the internet, is Doc Searle and Dave Weinberger just came out with an update to their manifesto, which is called the Clue Train. And it's a call to arms, and my dark side presentation today is a call to arms, because we will amuse ourselves to death, and the 95% of devices and things that will get connected will be driven by the marauders in their language. It's the language of Doc and Weinberger. The marauders who are going to seek their fame and fortune in the $15 trillion marketplace that's there to be had. And the rest of us stand to actually be part of the unwashed masses, which is a dastardly thought. And we as educators, in one way, shape, or form or other, have to find a way to take action. Thanks.
Thanks.